Hello.
Hello, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Hello.
Yeah.
Tired, but good.
Can I practice screen sharing? There's something I want to share during the meeting. How do I get permission to do that?
That will be done by Remy.
Remy. Okay.
I just gave it to you.
Thank you. Okay, I see. Oh, good. Okay. So I'll bring that up when we need it. Hi, Jeff.
Hello.
Hi, Keith.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks.
So who do we have left? Paul and Tim.
Tim. Peggy said she might be late, but she's coming too.
I sort of excused Peggy from this meeting. I told her because she's burning herself out already. She's working
Okay.
around the clock. She's waking up in the middle of the night worried about tree commission. I said,
Oh, no.
my rule always has been after 7 o'clock, there's no tree commission work.
Yeah.
Except for this meeting
Except for
because
this meeting.
because it accommodates other schedules. But I told her, I said, you have got to stop thinking about trees. Because she was at my house last week and she's like, oh my God, I'm waking up in the middle of the night. She's like, this is a 24-hour-a-day job. And I said, you better pace yourself because
Yeah.
she's got another year ahead of her. So anyway, if she joins us, that's great. But I'm going to remind her again that as chair, she doesn't need to be at every single meeting. It's
Okay. Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, she was here today for 2 hours and we were working on stuff. So,
Oh, no.
well, we talked for an hour and we worked for an hour. So,
Uh-huh.
but I don't know if you all saw that great article in Seville tomorrow, the first of 2 articles that they've written.
It's coming out tomorrow?
No, Seville Tomorrow published one last
Oh, Seville
week.
tomorrow. Gotcha.
And it's the first of a 2-part series. It's very well reported and it's on low-income neighborhoods and it's all about 10th and Page and it's very good because it's resident focused. So
Mhm.
it's not about the tree commission coming in. And next week, I think the second part comes out at the end of this week. And it's I expect it'll be just as well reported, but it's on trees and the on what we're doing. Trees and density and low income, affordable housing.
Excellent.
So if it's as in-depth as the one that they did last week, it's really 2 great pieces of work for us. So you should definitely check it out.
I haven't got a chance to read it yet, but they do great work. And I just saw the link, so I'll post that in the chat if anybody wants to take a look.
Yeah. I mean, they've been, they approached us back, I don't know, maybe in January. But we didn't have the tree canopy study as together as we do now. And they really wanted, they've been chomping at the bit for 2 months to write about this. So,
Mhm. Excellent.
so we've got that. And we also have, I mean, I've told Peggy, this is an opportunity for all of us, the commission, to take advantage. There's definitely public interest in this. There's definitely press interest in this. I think even like the work that we're doing, which we highlighted to City Council, Peggy made a presentation last week. There she is. Peggy and Jeff to the Planning Commission. They know that we're working on this. I think that, it's an opportunity to just keep seeding the press with stories
Yeah.
about this. So, maybe once Sidville Tomorrow is through with their second part, at some point, I think some PR from us back to the press, some release that we're working on a really vigorous new zoning ordinance. And that I think will get us some more press. I think we can't get
Yes.
enough PR
Right.
for that,
Mhm.
so. Peggy, you can't keep attending these meetings after 7 o'clock. I told you, you need to take a break.
We got an article in Seaville Weekly today.
Oh, and Seaville Weekly too. Great.
Shall we start without Paul, or shall we wait another minute or two?
Has anybody heard from Paul? I haven't seen him in any of our email threads the past week or so. Peggy?
He did reply to something yesterday, I think.
Okay,
So he's still in the loop.
great.
Well, I think we have two subjects to talk about tonight, and one is the questions that we're going to pose to NDS and Public Works at our next full commission meeting. And the other is to go over the very rough general recommendations that we want to submit to Seaville Plans Together by the middle of April. So are there any other things that we should talk about?
Sounds good. Yeah, I think that's a good agenda.
Okay. Which one do you want to start with?
Let's start with the questions, I guess, or
That's okay. See what I've got here. Okay, so these are the questions that people have submitted. I guess, first of all, were there any that people think we can just eliminate?
Can I, before you start, just get a definition of the small scale project, since I'm new to this? What does that describe?
so I can speak to it because I have been on several of those projects, which this is a reminder to Peggy, you have to get a replacement for me. That's a competitive VDOT grant program. And the city and county have actually been pretty successful, and Tim can speak to it too, because obviously he works for the county, but we've been pretty successful at getting some projects. So these are VDOT finance projects that focus heavily on sort of multimodal use, especially pedestrian and bike. And the
Okay.
tree commission is a stakeholder, so we always have a place on the steering committee, sort of as Tim is serving on the Seaville Plans Together steering committee. So, and you can see there are a bunch sort of in process. I think the first one that's actually going to start building out is East High Street once the bridge gets further along.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And by the way, that's a great thing. We've talked about utilities and all that. It's really important for the tree commission to be involved in these projects because obviously utilities is a big thing on all of these.
Yes. Okay, well, I think that question is great as is. Do other people agree?
Well, I think that's good generally, just this might be nitpicky, but the smart scale projects in the parentheses, not all of these really are smart scale projects. Like
Okay.
Place Commission is just a
Correct.
board that counselors,
And other
select
committees.
representatives to. And then for the first bullet point in there, I still think we should be calling it Seville plans together, since the comp plan was just one of the components of this bigger process. And now we're on to zoning, which is kind of the really consequential aspect for the tree commission.
Yeah, that's a good point, Tim. I hadn't noticed that. I mean, we have gotten an update. It's been a few months, probably last fall, from Tim Mach at NDS. So I don't know if Peggy has any more information. We may already know like what the status is of these projects. If time is pressed at the meeting, this might be a question that could be sort of asked sort of on a back channel.
Yes, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't have to be the first question, certainly. And I started to send it to James, but then I thought, well, if we're going to send him other questions, I didn't want him to be getting questions from all different people. So, I mean, we could put this at the end or something.
I support that, since this is kind of just a status update that
Yeah,
may not be
Yep.
the most strategic use of our interactive time with staff.
right,
Correct.
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Never mind. I'll do that later.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the Friendship Court plan, oops. Peggy has a question and I had a question, and I don't know if they, so is there still time to follow up on the tree commission recommendations for Friendship Court? And then my question talks about the fact that they approved removing trees before we even knew about it. And when we were getting ready to submit recommendations. Do we want both of those questions or just one, or combine them?
Similar to the smart scale, I would probably push this, in my opinion, kind of towards the bottom.
Yeah.
Again, I think a lot of the more kind of zoning and code changes we should focus on. They've already
Okay.
broken ground. I highly doubt,
Hmm.
you know, there's really anything we can do at this point for phase one. That would definitely be kind of more kind of if we get to it, in my opinion.
Okay, so the question then would be, will the tree commission have input into future phases?
That's great. Yeah.
Okay,
I do think we can put it toward the end, but I think there
Okay.
is opportunity to have Jeff into phase one. We're not going to save the oaks, but there are lots of other recommendations that the tree commission made back in 2019. And the site plan that they sent us is so general. For instance, they'll say medium trees and they'll give a list.
Do you have that? Do you have that handy, Peggy? I'd love to take a look at that.
Yeah, I can send it, but I do think we still ought to ask. Paul and I talked about it because we recommended some of the medium trees not be used. So what I'm saying is basically, it doesn't look like the site plan is set in stone. It may not. But I do think we should ask it. I didn't mean for these to be the first questions, but I do think
Yeah,
we
they
should
just-
ask that question. But I can send you out the tree commission actually in 2019 sent recommendations. And none of them were followed, I don't think, but
okay, so we can leave that in, that we sent recommendations. And I think we can take out my complaint about us not being, about us being ignored. Because that's water under the bridge, right?
yeah. But I think we do want to know and James, when Brian and I made the presentation to city council, he said basically, well, basically said they're going to try to save as many trees as possible. So we should definitely ask for a review of the next two phases. So I wouldn't take that out.
Okay, so that question is there.
Yeah.
And I think just quickly, just for background, so everybody knows the institutional memory in 2 seconds is institutional history on this is that we reviewed it. Peggy and Paul and others made comments. The pandemic came, we got shut down for a number of months. We came back, we started talking about nominating the trees. We got some pushback, but nowhere along the way did anybody ever inform us that we were arguing over trees that were already doomed. That's the breakdown in communication. That in a nutshell is that is the classic example of the lack of communication between NDS and Parks/Tree Commission. So that's how we ended up there. And, you know, that absolutely needs to be addressed. And to Peggy's point earlier, Jim Freeze thinks that the process, you know, works fine and that, you know, just needs a little tweaking. And I think the point is there's no communication. That's how we ended up here.
Okay, so
So
here we have
I got a quick question.
2019. Who?
I need to ask, I've never heard this. So talk about breakdown in communication. I honestly don't care if it makes me look ignorant. I didn't even know that those oak trees along Garrett Street are as good as gone. Is that a certainty? Like the approved site plan shows them being demolished? Is that correct?
So the first batch is likely all to go. The first 4 or 5, Peggy can speak to this, but it looks like most of those are going. We may have a chance to go back and talk about the other ones. What I'm saying is that the breakdown in communication was, we never got follow-up from anybody. The tree commission didn't. We got this sort of oblique pushback from Parks last year. Yeah, you sure you want to nominate these trees? But nobody ever said to us, by the way, you might not be in the loop on the latest plan. So we went ahead, pushed these nominations, and we never submitted them for strategic reasons. And then we find out that all the time we were doing that, the Parks and Rec and the Tree Commission were essentially out of the loop. We didn't know that this project had moved this far ahead and that the trees we were talking about were likely not even to be considered anymore. So, you know, there's just a lack of communication there. And I think, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but that's the problem.
How about changing the question? It's got 2 sentences. In 2019, the Tree Commission made a number of recommendations concerning the species and locations of the trees on the site plan. It appears that our recommendations were not communicated or were ignored or.
No, we communicated them.
Okay.
Were
We're not,
ignored.
it appears that our recommendations were not followed.
Well, yeah, right. But it's
In the
Should we say follow or should we say considered as
considered.
opposed to
Considered.
followed?
Yes. And I think at this point, let me just say, since it was on my tenure that we didn't get those tree nominations in, I think at this point, we should just forget that part. I'm not saying we wouldn't come back and nominate them. I think our big push right now should be, what can we do going forward to work
Right.
with you to do as much as we can to save these trees? And focus on that more than the fact that, hey, we spent all this time getting these nominations together and we're pissed about that. And, you know, to Tim's point, I think we should just kind of let that lie.
Yeah, I
Will
agree.
the Tree Commission have input into future phases of Friendship Court? And how will our recommendations be considered?
Well, I know this is hard to kind of do this by committee, but
Right now.
Vicki, there is the possibility we can have some input on phase 1, not saving the oaks along Garrett,
Right.
but in other ways, in some of the other trees that they're recommending for in the site plan, which are very vague. So there is a 2-part.
Yeah, I would also try to get in as early as possible, because if you just see final site plans
Mm.
and they're not,
Right.
and the plans don't save the trees, then where are you? You've got to get in real early and make sure that they can adjust things to save those big trees. The ones up near my office on Garrett and Second are just awesome. You really should try to save those.
Another
and the-
consideration, oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, or ask Peggy, the plan that we have, do we know if there's been any updates or anything? Do we have the most recent plan?
I have I have the most recent site plan. The most recent site plan shows 3 of the Willow Oaks to come down in phase 1, which were not on the site plan in 2019, and 1 to be saved, but there's a note on the plan says if the, you'll love this, Keith, if the contractor can't save the plan, replace it with a Willow Oak. So in other words, they're telling the contractor he can get rid of it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
But anyway, so the question I think should be, I'm not phrasing it right. Can the tree commission still have input on the first phase and in future plan? Because
I think you want to say the design phase, because there's DD design and then there's
Well-
construction documents. Once they're into construction documents, it's over.
well, Keith, I know this gets very complicated. What they showed us was the site plan for phase 1, the most recent. Now, I know what you're talking about, and that's what, but, so they have not showed us construction documents, which would have a definite planting plan in it,
Mhm.
but they're not showing us that. So I do think,
They're not there yet.
yeah,
Yeah, I think this is semantics. The site plan is a construction plan. It's a site development plan, and the contractor may have additional drawings that have other notes or any, but it's going to be perfectly consistent in theory with the site plan. So
Well,
the site plan.
Tim, but
is-
this, let me just explain for a minute. They'll say medium tree, the only thing they say on this site plan, large tree, medium tree. Then they have a list of large trees and they have a list of medium trees, but you have no idea. Let's say it's a red maple or something as a medium tree. You have no idea where they're going. I mean, normally, yeah, on a site plan, you'd say 3 red oaks, 4 willow oaks, whatever. So all I'm saying is the site plan they showed us, this gets into the weeds, I know, is still pretty vague. Paul and I think we could have some input on the phase 1, because it doesn't seem like they've made construction documents for the landscape plan. You see what I'm saying? I'm getting,
So that's a simple question. Can the tree commission still have input on phase 1 and future phases?
yeah, that's all I'm
Does that
saying.
Cover it? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's something that gets into our other recommendations about site plan application requirements and review
Yes.
process as like a big category of things. And I don't necessarily think it's the worst thing in the world if they just say this is going to be a large canopy tree, a medium canopy tree, and then have a plant palette, and they kind of stock those planting sites with whatever plant material is available that's on their approved palette for that particular site plan. The key then would then be to scour that plant palette and make sure it's the best species possible, right, for an urban site. It'd be even better if we can get a specific species in a specific site, but right now the site plan application requirements don't read that way. Having said all that, I think that's different than the grading plan, the erosion and sediment control plan, the things that should be where tree preservation is taking place. And that's where I think Friendship Court dropped the ball, because I'm speaking as a tree commissioner, yes, not on behalf of the whole commission, but I'm also thinking as a landscape architect, as an urban and environmental planner, as a pedestrian and a bicyclist. To me, it's just inexplainable why somebody would look at that site for redevelopment and fail to locate and identify those trees as an asset to work around and say, this is an invaluable thing that we're gonna save and work around as like a motivating factor, and not think, what can we do to, yeah, I don't have a fully formed thought on that, but I'm still kind of learning and processing and frankly grieving the fact that that mature stand of oak trees in the center of downtown is going to be gone. It's just so far from what we talk about in our comprehensive plan, and it's shocking to me.
It is.
But
And
but but I think I would actually pull back for a second and say, in terms of our questions for NDS, I think we can maybe have a little bit more organization, like a bullet point for current development review discussions. And maybe Friendship Court is one of those. And then I would say that there's a lot of questions on here that kind of maybe fall under a category of site plan review process. So that we can kind of organize some of those types of questions and discussions in like manner, and then maybe prioritize those from like site plan process into like actual projects, actual current development review processes. Or do it in the opposite, maybe start with specific projects and then work our way to more systematic and review process type questions. But I'd say let's lump those into categories so that we can structure our time with NDS.
I mean,
and
can
make sure
we,
hit all the different types of conversations that we want to have with them?
can we kind of keep it under the recommendations that we had in the slide presentation? I mean, that pretty much encompass, kind of use that as the framework. Because that, I mean, it really, there's so much kind of cross-pollination between the questions for NDS and what our zoning questions are. Just a thought, but if we kind of loosely structure it like that.
I think that makes sense to generally mirror them, but maybe our discussion with NDS creates opportunities that won't show up in the recommendations as explicitly. Like I think these questions about Friendship Court, like Brian was saying, instead of digging up a corpse of what went wrong, maybe it leads us into a question more about what does NDS staff need to do to have a stronger commitment to and a bigger emphasis on tree preservation. Like a big wide open question. Like we know what happened and didn't happen at Friendship Court. We know what happened and didn't happen at Apex. Like if we ask the big question, even if it's leading, because yes, we believe that site plan review process needs to happen differently. Maybe it's like starting at that wide open question that gets right to the heart of things that transcend one particular project.
Yeah, in our Brian and ours presentation to council, James Ferris, that question was asked by a council member to James, do you have the staff to do this tree protection, tree planting? He basically said yes. So, but our experience obviously has been otherwise. He's new. I think he's committed to doing a better job. But those are the two things I sent this afternoon. I think we have to let him know that things have not gone well in the past. So I think that question, what does NDS need to do to emphasize tree protection or tree planting or whatever? Because right now they don't have anybody in staff that really looks after these issues.
I would also say that it's probably not as good a use of time to ask any question of them for which we already know there's a problem and we're trying to work on a solution for in the code, right? Because believe it or not, we sat with NDS a few years ago, twice in my tenure, and we've gone through a lot of this. And that conversation about walk us through your site review process, and we get a nice talk, but at the end, there's really no solution. The solution is going to be in the code, which is what we're working on. So I'm not saying we shouldn't raise some of these subjects, but we already know we want to address some of these. We already know what the problem is. We already know how we want to fix it with the code. I'm not sure it's sort of a beneficial use of time for all the parties to have the same conversation with NDS for the third time. Because this is how we got here, the whole site plan review process. We've been fighting this all 6 years I've been on the commission.
Right, like the last the last subcommittee meeting that we had when we had NDS staff at that meeting, didn't they essentially flat out say I guess it's not this one site plan checklist, but it's the one that's clearly on the NDS site. Do you remember that one, Tim, that we showed it to them and asked, that had some some really definitive, some more definitive things. And they're just like, we never use that at all. Like barely knew it was actually on the website itself.
Mhm.
It was the environmental checklist, I think
Mm.
it's called.
I mean, I
Maybe
guess,
could we go through the questions and maybe I could reorganize them later before we send them to NDS.
yeah. I mean, it
That's
seems like we're
fine.
throwing a lot of things at the wall and obviously they can be
Yes.
organized. Maybe you and Vicky, you and Brian, or
Yeah.
just you, whatever, could organize them, and put them in a better order or group them as Tim has talked about.
So, yeah,
send them.
so I don't want to throw cold water on the conversation, but I think restructuring the conversation with what we have in mind about how we want to change the code, it raises questions like that question, for a new director and for new NDS, what is your plan for embedding a tree preservation oriented person in this process in your department? So that's a question, we know we want to ask that, but it'd be good to have that conversation with them just to see like, what is your plan? This has been a key problem. We don't have anybody in that department who's solely focused or mainly focused on trees. And our urban forester is overtaxed and that's not his or her department. So again, these questions could help us sort of flesh out our code response, but I don't think we should ask sort of an open-ended question for which we already are proposing a strong solution, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
I don't know what others think, but I mean, I just feel like I've been, I won't be there for this meeting, but I've seen two iterations of this conversation in my time.
Maybe an ignorant question, but why isn't the arborist in that department?
Well, that's a structural thing, and we've had this conversation, and that person is in Parks and Rec because they manage public lands and all of the trees, the right-of-way trees, parks, and that sort of kind of makes sense. But there should be somebody in that department whose, background is planning with a specialty in trees.
It's not
who's
just
the
trees,
person?
so,
No, general,
I mean,
yeah,
we talked about natural resources, but
correct.
no, it's not just tree preservation, it's tree, it's all the issues involved with trees. But
I think there should be somebody in both departments.
many localities have the urban forester in public works. Have you found that true, Keith?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't be in the zoning planning section.
No,
And the problem is, we know that until quite recently, and maybe they're going to rehire, there was somebody embedded in NDS who looked out for pedestrians and bicyclists. I don't have a problem with that, but why isn't there somebody there watching the trees?
Mhm.
Hello.
Hey, Paul.
Barely.
Yeah, so I think I'm just listening the conversation, and I think the last question, I think that's a very good and valid question to ask. Is why do they not have an individual in their department, something similar to the pedestrian coordinator? I think that's a valid question, and I think it should be asked. I am not an urban forester. I'm just a park professional, Parks and Rec professional, and I've been, stepping in as the urban forester, and I have similar questions as I'm digging. Just for example, this position, and I'll end up with the same question. There's only one individual that is basically in charge of every single tree within the city. And this one person is so taxed on taking care of his job plus every little thing within the city itself with trees. So it's a great question. I encourage you to ask that question.
For the input.
And we have,
Yeah.
in several years of presenting to council, we always listed on our wish list. What can council do? Give us somebody in NDS who's focused on trees. It might not be 100% of their job, but at least somebody who's dedicated, embedded within the process. And that's what we're lacking. And to go back to Friendship Court, there you go. There's no line of communication.
What's the population of Charlottesville?
47,000, Peggy,
Uh-huh.
something like that?
Not even 100,000.
We asked
No.
for, remember, we asked for a natural resource kind of manager, not just trees, but someone who's looking out for all the natural environment. So to make sure when the site plans are done, somebody's there doing an assessment of the impact on the natural environment, which of course will include trees, but water, soils, air, everything. You know, so I
And,
think.
and the response in the past has been, from NDS is, well, we have people who are inspecting sites for erosion and sediment control, and they can enforce, tree protections if there's clear guidelines for them to enforce. They said, we have people who do this in the past. They can look at the site plan. They can say whether it meets it or not, but it never has really happened. And it's not really, they're not experts in reading, site protection. And frankly, when it comes to protecting trees, that's been one of the biggest issues, because there's no way to protect trees when they have a perfect circle on the plan that says preserve this root zone, and everyone ignores it. And Keith Pitchford, you obviously know this, but that's something separately. But I think the idea of mentioning how there's a pedestrian coordinator within NDS who is a part-time position, having someone who is looking out for the city's canopy as a part-time position makes some sense. Not a full-time position. It could just be a part-time position. And I think that's valid. And knowing that, the person who is in Parks and Rec is typically dealing with removals, tree issues, things that are more of a maintenance, day-to-day maintenance plan, and not at all spending time planning and looking out for, every site plan that comes across their desk.
Right.
I will say that in DC, the sediment control people have become probably the #1 tree preservation enforcement people in the city. In just a short period of time, they are picking up so many violations, and it's been amazing. So if you can get your sediment control people to just ask that question when they're on site, it's huge. It was a huge move in the district.
Do any of you guys remember when Jack, their last meeting, was talking about the State Water Control Board and how there would need to be changes for the ENS people to actually, enforce some of that stuff? Do you remember, Paul or Tim?
I mean, for them to like shut down the job site, they do it for other things, but they were sort of not willing to do it for a BMP, for trees. And I guess that was one of those questions of like, do they enforce certain BMPs for stormwater, say, and then they don't enforce BMPs for, say, tree preservation? I don't know where they draw the line there.
But yeah, Jeff, to your point, there was some particular action they can't take unless the city as a locality gets some exemption from the State Water Control Board or gets some enhanced authority from the State Water Control Board. I just don't recall exactly what that was for. If it was for administering an enhanced critical root zone, something to that effect, but
Yeah,
it was something to do in the code without also having it kind of prerequisite approval from the State Water Control Board.
Should that be a question that we ask, like, apart from city municipality approval, what other governmental entities need to approve some of these? I don't know if we actually go back into that and get some specifics. I'm trying to think.
Yeah, I'd have to go back through my notes. I can do that while we talk in a minute here, but I was going to say before we kind of switch focus, Brian, I like your angle on getting to the heart of this issue better in terms of what is your plan for taking action, as opposed to an open-ended thing that I threw out there. So I would recommend we take out that what does NDS need to do question. However, I would say that the way that it currently reads, what is your plan for embedding? That sounds more like it's just about a staff question. And maybe that's part of the solution or the main part of the solution. I would suggest we ask, like, how can you ensure the development and site plan review process incorporates, adequate review for the protection of natural resources, including tree preservation and other things. But I'd say let's make it process oriented and make sure that the process incorporates, an authentic, legitimate, prioritized review of all the natural resource things. And again, that might be staff, or that might just be coordinating across departments. I was under the impression the city has some sort of interdepartmental sustainability and natural resources staff person, Ms. Riddlevold.
She's in Public
She was
Works.
kind of Public Works, yeah, and I think she was kind of behind the green print document that was like a really massive undertaking. It seems like I don't know what staff capacity is. I'm not going to venture to guess, but it seems like maybe it's an answer that includes NDS staff, but also includes a focus on the process that might utilize other existing staff in different departments or divisions, even making sure the right people are engaged, have the right sense of importance and priority of these issues, and just get the right input at the right time.
Yeah, I think Crystal's more a big picture thinker when it comes to sustainability, and maybe thinking more about stormwater and that sort of thing, and not necessarily reviewing site plans.
Yeah, but if you think about it, I think having that kind of mindset or that kind of perspective is really important in
Definitely.
site plans. But even more so, like, what about the legislative process when people want to rezone a property and get a site plan? I mean, a special use permit. That's when the biggest opportunity exists to make sure, okay, great, you want to intensify the use of this parcel and redevelop it. Okay, but you have to ensure and demonstrate your preservation of that stand of trees or whatever. And then it's caught before it ever gets to site planning, and it's not all about the administrative review, but it's something that the planning commission is aware of and the council is aware of. And so that's why I think,
unfortunately, they don't really have to do any grading on those, those initial, for those SUP submissions. So there's no proposed grading. It's kind of pie in the sky a little bit. So you can't actually say, yeah, I mean, there's grading, but they never showed the trees. It's never really clear of how they're preserving things or not.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, there's a natural progression to it in terms of specificity, but I think, any basic site analysis should demonstrate, like, hey, this is a property that has these assets or these resources. This proposal could potentially, harm or eliminate these resources. That should be part of any basic staff report, even at that planning level, as before you get to the site plan review process. So I don't think we disagree with each other. I think we're all in agreement that the idea would be, how do you ensure the process, whether it's legislative or administrative, is effectively, as Vicky put it, reviewing for these types of protections and preservation issues.
Right.
I think that's better than going at it with the language that almost sounds like a leading question about staff, even knowing that staff might be part of the solution. It's kind of bigger than that, though.
Yeah, it's definitely process. I mean, it's both, but you have to have a process first. And the response we got at City Council was, well, our process is fine, we just need to tweak it. Our response would be, no, there's a breakdown in process.
And code.
In the code, yeah. I mean, that's, and then of course, the code isn't strong enough in certain ways so that you could have the best people in place and the best process, but there's no teeth in anything they do.
Are are we asking? And I remember last time we reviewed the codes with staff. You know, they had a lot of feedback where we asked them all our pointed questions. They had a lot of like, this is an issue. This is an issue. Like, are they going to be involved in the review process from a tree preservation standpoint?
The code review?
Yeah.
I think they are. I think NDS staff is working with the main consultants for CBO plans together, but then like code design, I forget the name. There's sub consultants focusing on just
Right.
the code itself. So yes, NDS is working on that. I think we want to make sure we get our feedback to that internal group before they push things out to the public engagement process in the spring.
Right.
I think we want to take all the feedback that we've previously gotten from NDS staff, and you know, at some point we should switch gears and start talking about our recommendations soon, I think. But my point there is I think we should make sure we start with the problems, even if it's high level. But Paul, I know you did that great PowerPoint 2 years ago, in that you've got pictures of development that has no trees, right? And we kind of know what the problems are, but we want to start there. And then I think have more of a conceptual level of, you know, improve the site development process by having better standards, improve the application requirements, and then get into specifics below those concepts, but actually backing up all the way to like identifying what the shortcomings currently are.
Yeah, we had, just to circle back, we had that answer. It was, create, it's in the Google sheet. So create refined tree protection detail with more specific requirements, i.e. The critical root zone by DBH definition, present of critical root zone impacted utilities, et cetera. And then I guess that those revisions would then have to be submitted to the Water Control Board for approval.
Great work.
I had a question on the site plan checklist that Tim, maybe you can help answer. I don't know if you have something like this on the county level, or if anyone knows, like, so there's the whole landscaping section where kind of our point of interests are mostly covered in that checklist, and you know that has to be signed off by a planner. So what type of planner are we talking about? Is there any landscape architects on staff in the city, or is it a more general planner? Why don't, if so, why doesn't the landscape architect have that knowledge to kind of critically review? And maybe that's the question to ask, is like, are they doing that? Like, how did that slip through the cracks on some of these larger projects?
They don't have a landscape architect on staff, I'm pretty sure, Paul.
Well, I mean, Carrie Rainey, is she still there? Is she gone? She's gone. All right.
Gary is still there.
Yeah.
So what the site plan checklist, so is that something that exists and is in the requirements and just isn't used? Is that the problem with it?
It's used, it's used, but it does, but there's parts of it that doesn't seem to be, you know, that needs updating, let's say. One of the issues that we ran into was there's reference to a conservation checklist that just, you know, when asked, it was said it's just not used. So there's parts where there has to be sign off, but they're just not doing what's actually on the site, on some of the checklist items.
Well, in the BMPs for tree preservation, there is a big checklist, and it's quite lengthy, although there are some really great points there. I think you could probably refine that so it wasn't so detailed. But some of them are sort of like get arborist sign off, and it's like, well, no one's doing that, although it'd be good to do. But I think they're just too arduous. They're not doing it.
Before we move on to the codes, one other question, and we've asked this for the last couple of council presentation. I wanted to ask Rian particularly. The sustainability people are developing some good reports. The green print was a good one, the one they did about the heat islands this summer, but we have little collaboration with them. And I don't think they know what we do. We don't really know what they do. And so we've asked for the last 2 times, could we have a representative from Public Works, which would mostly be someone from sustainability, attend our meetings? And, just like we have someone NDS. What do you think about that, Rian? I think.
Yeah, so to talk about that, internally, we communicate quite often with different departments. But unfortunately, with COVID, we had a huge step of lack of staff. So most staff across the board is double, triple, trying to basically give the 50%. If we had fully staffed with everybody could give 100%. So going back to your question, Peggy, that would be a good idea, is to ask if they can come to the tree commission. I think I spoke to the environmental department to see if they want to come. I believe we got them hopefully scheduled for the May meeting to do just a kind of presentation to the tree commission on what they do, why they do it, and how the collaboration occurs between departments. I hope I answered your question.
So are they coming? I thought they were going to come and present that heat island study they did in the summer. Is that part of it?
I believe so. Let I just double check on that. I just know, I believe in February I reached out to just give a quick overall presentation of what their department do and what are they working on and how we work internally with departments. But if I can ask.
You're talking about the sustainability people or Public Works?
So again, there's just to paint the picture. So you have Public Works.
Yeah.
The environmental department is under Public Works. So Crystal's department is in Public Works.
Right.
So that department is in Public Works. So just to make sure, yeah.
Yeah. So Stacy Smalls, who's the director of Public Works, he's going to be at this April meeting.
That's correct.
And that was my thought, to ask him about how, we could cooperate more with their environmental department, have more communication.
Yeah, if anything else, it's, just how could you, maybe even quarterly, having them show up and just being like, here's what we're doing. And they don't have to have a presentation every time, but just sit in on the meeting and say, here's what we're working on. We're working on a free trees program. We're working on these great tree programs, but how can interdepartmentally, they speak to each other, and maybe the tree commission can sort of engage with tree stewards, other groups, Relief Seville, sort of start working together as opposed to siloing ourselves.
Right. Well, that's the whole point.
And I think the point of broadening this meeting that's coming up, it started under Paul, but the plan was not just somebody from NDS to come and talk to us at least once a year, but somebody from Public Works, not just sustainability, but somebody from Public Works to raise issues like, hey, we have concerns about utilities. The Public Works we overlap with Public Works beyond just the sustainability question. So we had hoped
Right.
that we would be able to at least at least on those sorts of things, that this meeting would be an opportunity for a public works rep to come and say, we have 2 or 3 things that are specifically related to how your department interacts with trees.
Yeah, I think it's just tricky if you're getting a rotating member. It'd be nice if you had a set member who is coming and then you have
Sure.
a consistency with, and then they could always check back in with others and say, hey, I checked in with this person, and here's the update. Maybe I'm recommending they come to the meeting instead next month to talk about these issues, but it'd be nice to have a consistent point person.
And again, that was on our wish list checklist to council for the 3rd or 4th year in a row. Paul started asking for this and we continue to ask for this.
I don't think it council is the place for it. I think it really has to go to Public Works and say, can you provide this? And have them sort of, you can go to council with it, but there needs to be a plan in place and we've talked to this person and they think they can do this. Is it possible? Is it not possible? Council's not going to say you have to do it if it's not possible.
No, not on this one, not on this one, but for example, the previous one we were talking about, somebody in staff, we talked about this at the last presentation. Obviously, even if it's part-time, you're creating a position. So council does have some input on that. But in terms of Public Works, you're right. It's really our conversation with Public Works. Working through our Parks and Rec staff, obviously.
Right.
I've got a question. When do we want or need to provide this list of questions to NDS staff? Is it like tomorrow? What's our timeline?
A week in advance probably be a polite thing to do.
We're not meeting till April 5th, so it's not like we have to send it to them. Yeah, I think a week.
So a week before April 5th?
Yeah, so that's like the 29th or something of March. So you got 2 weeks.
That's good. I think we've done a great job generating and refining questions, but I think there's still some opportunity to kind of gel it all together, and there might be some simplification or, check it for redundancy or anything like that. But
Do we want to switch this? Sorry, Tim. I was just going to say, should we switch this over to a Google Doc? So like, we don't have to keep ping ponging the Word doc with comments.
Is there someone that can do that? I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, I could totally do that.
Okay.
that's good for like this working draft kind of moment,
Yes.
and then maybe break it back out into like a whatever Word or PDF for sharing with NDS and having it kind of as a repository. But yeah, I'd work in Google Docs or whatever the right app space is called. I don't know. It's worked well in the past with Google Sheets, I want to say, or Slides.
Yeah, so
and
we got
we
the,
literally just given that slide right to staff, and then they can add their comments into it themselves. It's like a working doc.
Yeah, that's another. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Well, it seems like this draft needs to be, like you said, Tim, consolidated a little bit more.
Right.
Yeah, this one needs, I don't know, Vicky and Brian or whoever work together and kind of consolidate this into.
Yes, I'd
Or,
like to work with Brian on this and then send that to Jeff to convert it to a Google Doc and share it with everybody. And then
Yep,
we.
yeah,
Does that sound good?
Vicky, I can do it this evening, and then you guys can just work off it from there. I can do
Sure.
it.
Okay.
But yeah, like, no, I guess it is. I was gonna say, yeah, probably more, consolidate half a page to 1 page max.
Yes.
And I like Paul's question. It's one of those high level questions in terms of, how do the BMPs get enforced on projects? Like, how does staff currently do that? And there might be a sister question to that in terms of how could the code rewrite, incorporate the BMPs into the code, or just create a stronger linkage if that's even helpful. I don't know. But that type of question can get to a lot of, content in a short amount of time.
And that's an excellent tie-in to our next discussion on codes. Vicky and I talked about this last week. Peggy and I have discussed this. we could get some insight on that, because if it turns out that, well, we do this, but we don't do this, and we don't have time for this, I think when we approach the code, I think a good old belt and suspenders approach on some of these things is going to be the best.
Mhm.
Yes, you can incorporate by reference documents into the code, and they are, and people are on notice to go look at it. But if we find that there are 2 or 3 things in any of our best practices documents, guidance documents, that are really critical that we don't want to just rely on an incorporation, then we want to find a way to actually embed some of that language in our code recommendation. We can't do that for the entire thing. We can't take the BMP and put it in verbatim. But if we find out that, hey, they're not looking at these 3 things that we think are critical, then there we can actually explicitly add that in the language. And, you know, at the end, they can kick it back out. But I mean, at least as a recommendation, if there are those kinds of things. And so this conversation with them might inform us on that, to go back to Tim's point. We might realize that, hey, we really do need to have something more than just at the end of the section. It says, by the way, this incorporates the, you know,
Mhm.
standards and whatever, blah, blah, blah.
And did we ever get an answer on whether or not there's a whole new rewrite or if it's revisions?
So my understanding, and I know Tim was at the last meeting, but my understanding from the press that I've read and what's been put out is that they are starting by looking, so everything's on the table. Every part of the code's on the table. And they're looking through the whole thing. That doesn't mean they're going to rewrite every section, but they're looking at it. They're not going in there saying, we only have to look at the following sections.
Mhm.
So the entire code is open to review. And we should just treat it as the opportunity to give our comments, even if they decide at the end that, you know what, we think this is a beautifully written section. That doesn't prevent us from saying, wait a minute, we don't.
Yeah,
Tim, is that
that's
your
right.
sense?
Yeah, I think it's pretty wide open, Paul. To put it in the consultants' terms and the city's terms, they're scouring everything to kind of identify what's currently not working, and they're kind of calling that a diagnostic report. I'm maybe kind of mixing up my interpretation with their words, but anyways, diagnostic report, what's working and not working currently in the code. And then they're coming up with something to kind of combine with that to call it an approach report. So conceptual, like we intend to have the zoning ordinance accomplish these things. And then after finishing the diagnostic and approach reports and doing a lot of public engagement, then switching into the next gear, which would be coming up with more detailed solutions, like actual draft code and zoning ordinance.
So
And
for
then they would
this,
take that for public engagement and then finalize it over the winter. But it's pretty incremental, but it's pretty comprehensive too.
so the diagnostic part, are they asking for feedback on that? I mean, I can
I
give like
think that
what's not working.
I think that's that we need to structure our feedback to mirror their process. And we've always known that, but now that we know one of the first steps is the diagnostics, we should chime in with what we've already learned by practice and by our communication with staff. Here's what we know is not working. Here are the breakdowns or the omissions or the weak spots. And then kind of, you know, offer our conceptual or semi-conceptual recommendations and be prepared, you know, to have the detailed recommended code language
Right,
Correct.
that kind of fleshes out the concepts.
right.
But
So
I don't
that
think
first-
we have to go like line by line and recommend that a certain section have different language. I think they might end up with a code that has a whole different structure, you know, and it could be completely different.
Correct. But I think at some point, I still believe that once they've diagnosed and what sections are actually going to be rewritten, I think we are the only body that's going to be able to write the tree stuff.
I mean, yeah, hopefully the consultant is somewhat capable of that too.
Well, but what I'm saying is that the only ones with the eyes, as we've learned on the tree, I mean, they're going to look at the code, but how many of those people are going to look at the code and say, wait a minute, there's a problem here for the trees?
Yeah.
Right? It's us. So I agree that we should structure it like general recommendations. Here are the things we feel are not working. Please include this in your diagnostic. But when it comes time for them to say, okay, here are the sections where we're rewriting, I think we should be proposing some pretty specific language to the extent that we can, and not leaving it up to somebody else who might be a mystery person to actually write it for us. So I think we're on schedule. I mean, I think, Vicky and I talked about this last week. I think getting our general conceptual things out with some bullet points as has been developed is a good first sort of opening to saying, here's what we're working on, and we look forward to going through the steps with you on this.
Well, should we create a checklist, a diagnostic sort of checklist, or like take one of our existing Excel sheets and keep working on that? Like,
Well, I think the document that Vicky sent around, I didn't have a chance to comment on it, but Keith had a lot of good comments. I think that was sort of here are the high level things and here are some
Right.
specific things. I mean, I think that's a good place to begin, because
Got
that's sort of diagnosing, like, as to go back to Tim's point, from our experience, this is what we think is not working in the code. And down the road, we're going to propose some solutions. That's basically what we're saying. But for now, we don't want to propose the solutions until, as Tim said, we sort of want to see. They could decide to just completely blow up the whole code section and just rewrite it in a completely new way. So we don't want to spin our wheels trying to map it out just yet.
Mhm.
But I think the document, I don't know if Vicky was going to pull it up, but I think that document we all looked at is a good thing to plan to get fed into this process, sometime in the next few weeks or
Right.
mid-April.
Yes,
I think that's really doable.
yes.
Tim,
Yeah.
aren't they, I heard that it's a year-long process. I mean, didn't they just hire, can't remember the name of the firm is doing, but anyway, didn't they just extend their contract? So it's really they're not going to end up finishing this thing this spring. I thought it was a year.
No,
another-
but they're
Next
going to be
spring.
asking for public input starting in April.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, I might have said spring at one point, spring 23. So
Yeah.
it'll be approach and diagnostic reports are happening right now. They're gonna finalize those and do public engagement through the spring,
Okay.
and then draft the actual, actually write the draft zoning ordinance in the summer, maybe into the fall, and then do more public engagement based on that draft zoning ordinance, in the fall and winter. And then try to finalize the drafts and have the hearings, like the official public hearings, and adopt the code next spring.
Oh,
The
okay.
timeline that they shared at the first Seville Plans Together meeting for this zoning component, they mentioned March 23 as their target date for
Oh, okay.
completing this, with hearings and city council adoption, which I thought worked really nicely with kind of the way our commission has appointments and March being the cutoff time. So that's kind of interesting. But yeah, I think not to hammer the same point home, but one of the best things we can make sure we do now, which we haven't quite done recently anyways, is highlight what the problems really are so that folks get the picture in a well articulated, organized, and maybe even visual aid kind of a way that demonstrates why our conceptual recommendations and our specific recommendations, and eventually the exact code language, why all that stuff matters a lot. So pointing out the problems is our biggest charge. And then we kind of have some of these conceptual level ideas and recommendations fairly well fleshed out, fortunately. They've been years in the making.
It's our gripe list is what it is. It's the tree
Right.
commission's gripe list since it was founded practically. I mean, Paul will back me up on this. A lot of these things have been kicked around forever.
Yeah, the other one we haven't talked about too much, and this is, I think I brought it up recently, just if a developer encroaches into a riparian zone, there's no teeth for them whatsoever. It's so unclear, that process of what they have to remediate, if they have to remediate anything. It basically comes down to 20 shrubs and 2 trees or something. It's really, if they sort of overbuild their lot right now from a penalty standpoint. It's only happened once that I'm aware of in the city, but it's, yeah, anyway, that really needs some teeth.
Mhm. Do we want to move on from this document and look at the other one? Or what?
I think so. Yeah, I think this one is ready for some sort of like refinement, if you will, and
Yes.
then we can revisit it before it gets sent out. But yeah, maybe some more of this high level discussion for the
Okay,
recommendations and feedback.
Yeah, I sent, I created the Google Doc, and you guys should all have notifications on that, because Vicky, you've made some revisions to it since we've been
Yes.
talking. You can either send me the Word document now, or you can just simply copy and paste into that Google Doc, and we should be all set.
I'll go ahead and copy and paste.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for
Yep.
setting it up. Okay,
Just a warning, I may drop out at some point because I'm on my iPad and it's old and I just noticed the battery's dying. So
well,
if I disappear, it's not a lack of interest. It's nothing you said.
Well, on that note, Brian, I'm asking this of city staff. Do we have a hard stop? I don't know what the schedule is for the agenda.
I'm not sure for an evening meeting. I do know we had two 2-hour blocks. We used one for our regular meeting, but we didn't intend to go 2 hours this evening, but that's a fair question to staff. I don't know how this meeting was set up. Was it for an hour?
So we have, when I communicated with the communication department, since the department is pushed down to only 3 folks right now, so Tree Commission gets 2 slots per month of Zooming. There's not a true specific timeline, like to say an hour or 2, but we only get 2 Zoom meetings in 1 month.
so can we continue for another hour?
You can.
Well,
I have to personally drop out probably at 9 is
Yeah.
the latest that I can
Okay.
stick around.
Yeah, me as well. I was going to say there's 2 layers to that question. One is what's our hard stop, and then what do we as members feel like we
Right.
can do tonight? But I think in the next 20 minutes we can probably all have a chance to provide feedback on where this document is and what our thoughts and questions are.
Okay,
We just can't finish it, obviously, but
right,
that probably won't happen even if we stick around till 9:30 anyway.
right, right.
For me, I thought this was a good distillation of everything we've worked on so far. I like how some of the main headings, numbers 1, 2, and 3, and so on, are more concise. I think some of the language that was in that PowerPoint or that Google Sheets document or whatever was pretty deliberate. So I wonder if there's a way that we can come up with like a hybrid somewhere in between that's still more concise, but maybe a little bit more elaborate than these. I just didn't have a chance to really sit down and
Right.
type any recommendations, but I like how this is more action oriented, like enhance the standards and the requirements, as opposed to burying that at the end of
Yeah.
a compound sentence. So this is a little.
Would
smarter.
we? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tim.
You're good.
I was just going to say maybe we kind of synthesize the Google Sheet that initially created by Paul, and then we kind of updated after that subcommittee meeting, and kind of use that to maybe provide specific, like the kind of specific code references to where this draft has, because that work is almost already done. So probably a good hybridization of referencing the relevant code to what we kind of distill
Okay.
down.
Yeah,
Is that a different document from the Google Slides document that you did?
It is. This one is a Google Sheet, so like an Excel spreadsheet, and
Oh,
I do believe everyone has access to it.
okay.
I'm gonna have to go, but you all are doing a great job. Continue.
Peggy.
Thanks for hopping on.
Stop
Yeah.
thinking about trees, Peggy.
Huh?
Stop thinking about trees now.
I know.
Get a good night's rest. Don't wake up
Yeah.
worrying about trees.
All right, I promise.
Right. All right.
Can I worry about it in the middle of the night?
No.
Yeah, go.
No.
So I'm sorry, Vicky, could you scroll through this document and just read the
Yes.
headings of these real quick?
So enhanced tree standards and requirements. Improve site plan application and approval process. Enhance inspection and enforcement during the construction process. And enforcement penalties and remediation.
Got it. Okay. And then do we talk about soil volume in the first one?
Soil volume is, yes, it's,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, just making sure it's in there. I'm sorry to say I did not read this document for some
Right.
reason.
Requires
Yes.
sufficient soil volumes for healthy street trees.
Yeah, and then you could add in there, see streets that work. We've kind of gone through what they should be and requirements, and many other documents before this one has sort of been leading up to this process. And they keep saying that, those other efforts were supposed to be informing this one. And I just want to make sure that we're doing that, such as our streets of work, and then the code, and then the standards, design standards and guidelines.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
And specifically having that referenced in any code revision, right? Because that
Yes.
was one of the issues, is that it's not actually comes up anywhere.
okay, are we only referring to street trees on that, or are they just the trees in general? Should I take the word street out of that?
You could take street out of that. I mean, those two documents that were created, I just want to make sure that in that code process, they are referring to them. They know they exist, and they,
Mhm.
they're good documents.
Yes, okay. Okay. So we've got enhanced requirements for riparian buffers to address that problem, Paul.
Just and I guess with enforcement as well, if riparian buffers are impacted, what are requirements by developer? That goes into the bottom, I think.
Yes.
Yep, that's good. Yeah.
All right, I'm at 10%. I'm gonna be knocked off in a second. So Vicky, I'll follow up with you in the next few days.
Good, okay.
All right,
Thanks.
sorry to go. Thank you all.
Okay.
See you, Brian.
Yeah.
And the red text in this, is that who's writing the red text?
Me.
That was Keith.
Okay, got it.
Does the city have a tree fund? You mentioned
No.
payment into a tree fund or something? Is there?
That would be a new thing, I think.
Well,
Yeah.
there is a place the money can be donated by the public, and then it can be used by the different groups. So it's not necessarily called a tree fund, but it could act that way.
But this is talking about as an enforcement mechanism.
Right. So if someone had to give money to the city as a
Right.
penalty for
Yes.
removing a tree, that could go to that fund. And it's not necessarily called a tree fund currently, but it could function that same way.
I mean, as you know, the district had that planting option and then they gave up on it because they couldn't keep up on monitoring the plantings. They all seemed to die. So they went straight to pay to play. It all was a fee.
Yeah.
And they built up a big amount of money and then suddenly the money disappeared into some other city fund. And there was a,
Mm.
yeah, it was a mess. So they now have it protected in some way from the city council, but just a warning that those funds can sometimes disappear, but
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
the follow-up and monitoring of those plantings just was impossible. They couldn't
Mhm.
keep up with it.
Right,
Yeah, we can't keep up with our own street tree plantings. So
right.
Better to just take the money and do something good with it.
Should we include all of the text that's in red? I thought
Well, those
some
are
of
just
it
my
might be a
thoughts, you
little
might-
too specific for this point.
You
well, I
might
think
wanna-
some of them are sort of ensuring,
Right,
I think it's more for comment, not necessarily to submit.
Yeah.
So we may
okay,
advise things.
Yeah.
Like I definitely agree with you, Keith, not changing the caliper size of trees. And the city has a standard 2-inch caliper size. And
Yeah,
I don't, they can't water maintain anything bigger than say 2.5.
Yeah.
so should I take out the words "and larger caliper plantings"? And just
Yeah.
large canopy trees? Would that be good?
Increased number of trees required in new development. I mean, yeah, just take out larger caliber.
mhm.
Okay,
Yeah, and yeah,
Yeah, so to Keith's point there, just take out that the red text isn't necessary anymore.
Right.
And the tricky thing about increased number of trees required in new developments, I mean, they're maximizing footprints, on sites. And so by saying add more trees, there's not a lot of extra places to put more trees. If you have 0 lot lines and everything is
Mhm.
absolutely most dense, I think it's about, I think the second point of just, or the third, but, getting minimum setbacks that
Mhm.
are generous enough to have room for trees, as well as the soil needed for those trees.
Mhm.
is this a section? I mean, this to me seems like the section where we want to bring in all of our recommendations about basically best practices,
Yes.
enhanced standards,
Okay.
enhanced minimum requirements, all the best practices. Does the enhanced tree preservation objectives go into this recommendation, or does that have its own category? I forget.
Well, it doesn't say enhanced protection. Right, incentives for preservation.
Because I either think we put, ultimately I think these should be numbered and have like maybe some sub bullet points as we flesh all this
Okay.
out. But if tree preservation enhancement goes into this category, I think that should be the first thing we talk about, and then talk about enhanced landscaping requirements, for new
Right.
plantings. And kind of start with protecting what's there to begin with. But I just literally can't remember, and I don't have this pulled up anymore, as far as whether we have a separate whole recommendation for tree preservation. And maybe that's maybe that's its own thing, you know? I kind of think it is, but it could easily go into this category if that works just as well.
Yes,
We have a whole section in that on the Google sheet.
yeah. Okay. So this comment in red under requiring tree preservation rather than replacement.
Yeah, I think all the red should just come out. Those are just my
Okay,
thoughts.
just comments.
Yeah.
Okay,
They're good comments, Keith.
yes.
Yeah.
excellent.
Don't
you.
ignore them. Well, you know, Tacoma Park has the replacement standards based on what was taken out. So if you take out an oak, you have to put back more than if you took out a mulberry or
Right.
something like that. So there's a lot of good sense to how they do it, I think.
Yeah, the always the tricky thing is just Maryland versus Virginia, obviously.
Well, we don't have to tell them it's Maryland. We just say it was
Right.
Tacoma Park, Virginia.
There you go.
Is that the kind of thing that you couldn't get away with legally? Telling them that they have to put more in for an oak than a mulberry, that requirement?
I mean,
No,
if
I
there's
think-
usually it just comes down to room in my experience. They've
Yeah.
overbuilt the site and there's no more room for trees. And that's where I think it'd be great if there was a set sheet, a cost sheet that says a 2-inch caliper oak costs installed $500. And that $500 needs to then, if you can't,
Yeah.
I don't know, like for replacements, especially is really where that comes into play. And if they kill a tree that they say they're going to save, and it's a 50-inch caliber tree, there should be a dozen trees or say $6,000 that they're putting into a fund.
Mhm.
Yeah, which doesn't equal the value of the tree they killed, but regardless.
I know. But I'm just trying to get some way, something.
Yeah, I think that's in the remediation part, isn't it?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I know. No, Keith, your point about, if you take out an oak, you should put back an oak. I think that has some value there for sure.
Well, yeah, or more trees. Because it's a valuable species.
So
Right.
the
There's
the
many ways
very
to do it.
last thing is establish enhanced requirements. Oh, but this is for off-site tree planting. Require meaningful compensation from developers for substantial damage or removal of a tree that's been designated. That's not really the same as just saying if you can't keep it, you have to replace it with more than what you took out.
We need that language because, yeah, if you take out a mature canopy tree and put in a 2-inch caliper tree, that's not fair to the public. It's not okay for our environment.
Well, that
That's
language
that's
exists.
essentially what happened at Apex.
Yes.
And that
I mean,
language exists in our tree preservation BMPs. We have that explicit what ratio
Good.
replacing trees per caliber. And we can
Okay.
enforce that further by saying what species replaces a certain species as well.
yes, let's stitch that in here, whether it's the enhanced
Yes.
requirements and standards or whether it's more of the remediation
Yes.
and enforcement.
Yeah.
Well, is this going to be another document where we can make it more of a Google interactive review and add
Well-
comments and?
I think
Yeah,
that makes most sense. Right now,
Yep.
I don't know if we need to go through this line by line.
Right.
Yeah, I did that same thing. The skeletons there, Vicky.
Okay,
Just copy and paste. You guys should have the email notification.
okay.
Nice.
And could you,
Thanks, Jeff.
and
Yeah.
then that link to the other Google Sheet, did you send that out again as well, Jeff?
let me see if I can resend it. If you go to Google and search in your Google Sheets just with tree, it should
Oh.
pop up.
No, I know I have it. I was just making sure everyone else does.
Oh, yeah, no, I sent out invites to everybody here.
Okay.
Maybe last
Great.
meeting or before that. Just double check. Yeah, I see, I think Tim's in there now.
Okay.
Yeah, Paul, Jody, Keith, Mark, Peggy, Tim, Vicky. Am I missing anybody? Brian, I'll send that to Brian.
Okay.
But maybe referencing both of, like having this and that, sort of making sure we're not duplicating efforts.
Oh, that's
Right.
no, that's a great idea. What I'll do is I'll send an email, kind of in one of the last chains, and then I'll just embed the links too, so everybody can kind of, they need it again. But yeah, if you just go to Google, and click on that Sheets app, and then in the search tab, do tree, it should pop up pretty easily.
Yep.
But yeah, that I'll reply to our recent thread with those links.
And then we'll just put a deadline on when we want to have feedback by, and we'll all work on it that day before. And
Should we aim for a week before our next meeting?
I think so.
Okay,
Yeah, because that kind of tracks with the questions for NDS
right.
as well. Although maybe we should give ourselves a couple extra days. We can, I don't know.
Yeah,
Since our deadline for the NDS questions is relative to our next meeting,
right.
but we might want to use a little extra time to
Yep.
work on this between that deadline and the actual meeting.
Okay, I think we want to have something that we can get approved at the meeting.
Yeah, that's true. And that's April 5th.
Yeah,
Okay, well, I don't plan to be here. That's spring break for city schools. So unless I log in from somewhere else, which is possible, I may not make that one, unfortunately.
Yeah, I can just sub in for you.
Yeah,
okay.
that would be nice.
You're right.
Well, I will definitely work on this before the next meeting,
Good,
whether I'm there or not. So yeah,
Okay.
this is
great,
good, exciting work.
yeah.
We need to get it to a point of finished or draft finished.
Yes, yes. Okay,
All right, 9 o'clock. Do we?
oh, it's 9
Yeah.
o'clock.
Let's call it.
Okay.
Thanks, guys. Have a
Thanks,
good evening.
everybody.
Good to see you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for sticking
Yeah.
around, Brianne.
Yeah.
Yeah,
problem.
thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
See y'all.
Good night, everybody. See ya.